welcome. This is the Press and Politics podcast, hosted by yours truly, Matt Fitzpatrick, and the lovely Tom Bondaruk.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. How are all you doing during the current lockdown? I know I'm bored. One thing that really keeps my blood pumping, though, is the ability to discuss politics, and today we're discussing the press and how vital it is for a democracy. Firstly, what exactly is the press, Matt?
Well, the press is the collection of media, newspapers, news channel, or any information given to the public by a source. That can include the internet, social media, YouTube, or even this podcast. They are all inclusive in the press.
Our first point of discussion is about the question, how can the press and the government best serve a democracy?
And that is by informing voters. So the first part about this is most important is elections. So if people don't know about their voters and they're just going to vote for anyone based off of false ideas or lies that people tell about them. So it is important that we involve the voters and inform them properly so we can have a true election.
Yeah, in order for the voter to make an educated decision, they have to know what goes on in government. For example, I live in New Hampshire. I don't really know what goes on in Washington, D.C., and like what the government does and stuff and like what laws they vote on. But because of the press, I'm allowed to know about that, which they get the information to me. And the ability for the press to provide accurate news is something that's very important to democracies.
Yes, as press is vital to democracy. It's almost like a public's weapon to attack the government, as they will challenge, report, or investigate the government just to make sure they're held accountable if they misuse their power.
This has also happened many times in history, which we'll bring on to our next point.
All right, our next point is the discussion between the press and its relationship to the government throughout the United States history. And ever since the start of the country, and even before then, there's been evidence that the press is important to society, so the founding fathers made sure to protect it with the First Amendment.
One key cool fact about the press is that it refers to the printing press, which was invented in the 16th century. That invention sparked a lot of new laws across Europe, which eventually applied to colonial America. One of those laws in which England made sure that anything printed by a press had to be first approved by the English government. This law was taken into effect in colonial America too, in one instance where a New York colonist printed something that was against the New York colonial government. There was a legal battle, and the New York colonial government won, and his newspaper was decreed libel against the government. And this further onto this point, the Common Sense pamphlet which was probably very pivotal in the Revolutionary War, not in the war itself, but just the ideas and motivation. Without free press and the distribution of that, it wouldn't have been possible. But even Britain then decided to try and suppress it, and they made it illegal. But the Common Sense pamphlet still made it to many people.
And one thing we'll see later when we talk about the Supreme Court cases, when we saw the Pentagon Papers, that's another point in history where the government was in deep contact with the press, battling it out to see who could control power. But it was made sure that the press would control power by the Supreme Courts during those cases and by the First Amendment when it was first laid out.
Yeah, it is very important today that they included that in the First Amendment, because without freedom of the press, our democracy is almost untenable. And about freedom of the press, there's sometimes exceptions, such as like the Sedition Acts, where during wartime and other times that the president decrees necessary, some stuff can be restricted in the newspapers. And the government can exercise prior restraint if they think that something printed will go against national security and not be safe. Our first point of discussion is about the responsibilities that the press has not only to the government, but to the people, and the responsibilities that the government has to the press. I think that the biggest responsibilities of the press to the people are providing verified and in-depth and relevant news. How do you comment on that, Matt?
Yeah, I agree. It's the press's responsibility to accurately report information given to or observed by the government, as it creates a space that enables the open exchange of ideas and opinions. Without this space, we wouldn't be able to talk as a democracy and share ideas and concepts and philosophy.
Yeah. And in doing so, I think that the press should also take national security into consideration. They should be mindful of what they print, as it may have implications elsewhere. And they should also be respectful to the government unless the government does something to make them lose that respect.
Yeah, and then that goes the same way for the reverse. The government's responsibility is to provide them with accurate information. As if they lie to the press, then they're basically lying to the people, as the press will only report false news to the people, and that'll be on the government's hands.
That's very true. And the government should also be transparent. They should afford access to the press for like press conferences so that the press can understand what's going on and accurately report it to the people.
So our next topic is the discussion of current events relating to the press. And as of right now, there's major events going on around the world that relate to the press. As we just had an election that's still undecided, even though it seems like it's going to be decided eventually. But the amount of pressure on the press is insane, as Trump completely bashes CNN and other media outlets, and even outlets that are generally biased towards him, like Fox News. They're just absolutely clashing as the election goes on, because he claims that there's fake news, and his use of Twitter is also a new
Yeah.
thing the country has seen, and it's just an absolute madhouse right now.
Yeah, his use of Twitter, it really like circumvents the press's job. Like instead of having the press report on what he's doing, he does it himself. It's almost like he's trying to eliminate the press as like a means of information. He just wants to do it himself. He wants to control the information that's out there. And what's really interesting about Twitter is that like there was a case where he blocked people and like he couldn't block people anymore according to like the law because he was preventing their information.
Yep.
And then another law, not in the US specifically, but I thought it was very interesting, like a potential law, was in France that they're banning the filming and photography of police officers. And I feel like that's kind of a form of a free press violation. Because if you think about it, that's like information getting out to people and they're holding the police accountable, which is like a law enforcement agency, and they're being paid by the government. So I feel like that's a part of the government almost. And them not being held accountable in France is very dangerous, as maybe a politician could see that here and try and implement something like that. It's very scary.
Yeah, I completely agree. And another thing you think about that, there could be a slippery slope. So if you stop recording the police, what then? Maybe stop recording just government officials, government anything. There could be on downward slope where just stop recording anything related to the government, and that'll restrict the press, restrict the ability to call people out, and yeah, it's just you never know what could happen from there.
It's a good thing that we have the Supreme Court to protect our free press.
Yes.
There have been many Supreme Court cases that have helped define free press. Those cases help protect our rights, and that includes free press. And we'll just name a few of them.
So firstly, probably the most popular is the Pentagon Papers, where New York Times was facing the United States government. So basically what happened was President Nixon was issuing an order for the New York Times to stop publishing the Pentagon Papers, and those papers were giving information about the Vietnam War, secret information that the public did not know about how involved they were in the war. And it went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled in 6-3 favor of the New York Times, as basically in order for the government to suppress the press releasing the papers, they needed to prove that it would cause immediate danger to the United States, and they could not do that. So this set a precedent that in order for the government to suppress the media and the press, they have to have a legitimate reason, which is it can cause immediate danger.
Mm-hmm. And another one that I'm going to talk about is Hazelwood School District versus Kuhlmeyer. And this was about public school officials who had the ability to censor the newspaper, but it was ruled in the Supreme Court that they were in the right because it was a school curriculum rather than a form of public expression. But I still believe that this represents an infringement of free press because it was censored, but the Supreme Court ruled against this. So this is like not a case of free press, apparently.
Yeah. The second one for me was a Gertz versus Robert Welch in 1974. So Robert Welch owned a magazine, and it spread ultra-conservative views. And so what happened was there was an officer who was arrested, and damaging and factual misstatements were released in the magazine. So statements that were completely false and damaging to this cop's reputation. And the court ruled in a 5-4 decision that a private person, so someone who's not in like public spotlight, is more vulnerable to injury to the reputation, and they don't have to prove malice and actual intent to lie for statements for the press to be taken away, which is what would usually happen if like it was government official. They'd have to prove with actual malice if they want to like charge them with defamation. But for a public figure, like a regular person, they don't have to prove malice towards someone else if they want to prove defamation.
That also ties into my next case I'm going to talk about, which is Garrison versus Louisiana from 1964. So a Louisiana law that said that true statements made with actual malice could be censored was overturned by the Supreme Court. And then the Supreme Court gave a definition that says the newspaper could only be censored if it shows a reckless disregard for the truth, and that otherwise it'd be protected from the First Amendment. And I mean, this really applies to the modern day. Like you see a lot of like malice in newspapers and like them calling out certain political figures. But I guess as long as there's no reckless disregard for the truth, this is protected under the First Amendment. Even though it's not respectful and it's unprofessional, they're still allowed to do it because of the First Amendment.
Yeah. So our final topic that we're going to discuss is conspiracy theories and its relationship to the press. Right now, today, we're in a situation where there's quantitatively more information about conspiracy theories and misinformation, and as a result, these conspiracy theorists are benefiting.
Yeah.
Theories are featured topics sometimes on social media platforms because conspiracy theories are very good at capturing online attention, and this will serve as a negative feedback loop as more mainstream media will cover it, can cover this conspiracy theories, and only to debunk it, which sometimes rarely happens. And
yeah, and social media, it puts people who have the same mindset in like the same group, so they're in their own isolated communities, and when everyone else has the same ideas with them, those ideas get reinforced and they believe that they're right. Some examples of conspiracy theories that the media makes more popular are such as the flat earth theory, which I don't know why people think that, but for example, Kyrie Irving thinks the world's flat. But because he's a basketball player, he gets a lot of media attention. So more people say, oh, my favorite basketball player thinks the world's flat. Maybe the world is actually flat. And media allows this to happen. They allow this false information to be spread. And another example of this is the election fraud that Trump has been recently talking about. He keeps talking about it, and his supporters eat every word up of what he says just because he's the president and his name's Trump.
Yeah. One great example too is the moon landing. As back when we first did it, no one thought it was fake, but now because of the internet and some people who are obviously radical in their beliefs will say something, and it's just only people who share their view will see that, and so they'll be in their own small tiny group and they won't be debunked, but as they'll band together and argue and will only make their beliefs stronger.
Yep, this is how people get radicalized. And another theory is about 9/11. I think it initially started out as a meme where like a lot of people would say Bush did 9/11 and stuff like that, but some people actually think that it was an inside job. And this is only reinforced by what we've already said. Media, specifically social media, allows this to happen. They don't ban misinformation. They just allow it to spread and get attention, because misinformation often gets more clicks and more likes than false information.
And if anything, all this does is hurt the press, as fake news and conspiracy theories, that's what sells right now.
Yeah.
All people, reporters producing truthful, accurate, and interesting news won't get those views, and they will make less money as a whole.
The people need to hold the press accountable. We should look at it like say a newspaper has like false information. People need to boycott that newspaper. The more, even if you click on it, you know that it's wrong. By you clicking on it, you're supporting that newspaper. You're giving them advertising money, or if you buy their newspaper, you're giving them money. We can't do that. In order for the newspapers to stop printing false information, you have to not absorb their content. Yeah. Same thing with social media.
Yeah.
There's really, because there's, as we talked about before, there's really no instrument for banning information such as that. So the people must be the ones who do the job themselves.
Yep.